my final project for CS355. So my project description is basically I'm using two APIs as requested. So the first one is going to be about the football API. So this will give us pretty much the different teams and later on different soccer matches. And once we get the team from this API, right, a team from the Premier League, then basically we will pass it to a URL in the news API key, and then it will retrieve all the news from that given team. So of course this is synchronous because basically it's first waiting for the first call on the API football to get the team name and then basically pass it into the API news to get the news from that specific team. So first of all, we're gonna go through this diagram right here, but I'm gonna go here first so I don't get lost. So the description of the project and which endpoints I'm gonna be using. So pretty much I'm gonna be using 3 endpoints. So the first one will be basically to get the Premier League teams. So this is the host name, this will be the path. So this will be basically the API.football to get the Premier League teams. Then we will have basically to get the matches that are scheduled, and then finally we will have an endpoint from the news to get the actual news from the team. All right, so we're gonna go through this diagram, which is really simple and fairly simple. So first of all, once the client enters to this host, the localhost 3000, we're gonna go, the first thing we're gonna get is basically a get method on this. So as soon as the client requests something from the server has to provide a form, right, as you specify. So basically once this get method gets to the server, then it will get another get method, but in this case it will have the competitions, the Premier League. So basically this is the point that I was mentioning. So basically it will try to retrieve the Premier League teams from this football data.org. As we can see it here, we have on this documentation, we have basically to get the teams, to get a specific team, we have to basically do this, right? And to specify the competition, we have to do the before competitions Premier League, and then we will have a team. Okay. Once basically the API provides a team, it's gonna give us an OK message. So the status code is gonna be 200. It's gonna be like, okay, I'm providing the server the teams in a form of a JSON. Then the server is gonna provide an HTML right to the client, right, with a status code 200 saying that it's okay, I'm providing you this. This HTML form is going to contain basically all the teams from this API, and once basically those teams are retrieved, then the user will choose a team, right? The user will choose a team and then you will send it as a post. So the post will have, so the body of this post will have a team ID and a team name. Once it gets to this point, then we will again go to the API football, but in this case, once we have the team already, once the client selected a team, and then we will have this endpoint right here to basically check all the scheduled matches. So for example, on here, right? So for example, we have one of these examples in which this is the one that I use, this API. So this is basically says it's see all upcoming matches, in this case for Real Madrid, which has this team ID, but in this case we will be doing for the team that basically we want to get the information from, right? The one that the client selected. Once it gets to this point right here, you will send it to the API. The API is going to respond with all the matches with all the matches from that given team to the server. Then the server will basically use another get method where it will put basically the team that we are trying to get the information from. Then in this case, basically it will be the team that was passed on here, right? Then it will go to the API news data. It will return articles, like news articles from that. And then once the server gets it, it will return what? It will return the matches and it will return the news right from the APIs into the client. So this post basically as soon as the client sends the form, it will redirect it into these results URL where it will basically return the matches plus news. All right, and also we're gonna go now to the code. So I'm using pretty much just the built-in Node.js methods. I'm not using anything external. The API credentials. So to get the credentials, basically I created a JSON method in which I have here the API key. So I'm using an API key for football, and then I'm using an API key for news. This is public, but since you said that we only need an actual API key for one of the APIs, then I think that should work. So basically we're getting these credentials. Once we get these credentials, we go into this method, the JSON HTTPS request to node object. So this is a helper method in which basically makes the code a little bit simpler because it returns an options. The options is nothing but, for example, on here, where basically it's like it takes the host name, the path, the method, and then it passes also the football API key. So this gets passed, right? So some information is going to come to this, some information is going to come from here, and then we're going to have a callback after this fetch JSON gets executed. So we're going to have this request. So we're going to have an HTTPS request basically asking for information, asking for all the data from a given IP, from a given, in this case, hostname and the path, right? We will have, so these options get passed into these HTTP request, and then there's going to be an S3, which is going to be the response. But this is different from this. So this, in a sense, is a readable, not a writable. So we declare this data as an empty body first, and then we have a data event. So this data event will take chunks from these options that we are basically getting, and then it will be basically writing into data chunk by chunk. Once we're done, we're gonna have an end event. We're gonna try to parse data. So basically this is probably the most important part of this section, where basically JSON.parse does, since we're getting a JSON from the API, it will return it as objects, as useful objects for the Node.js. And then we will catch an error. If an error happens, we're gonna return it as a callback. So everything is gonna be returned as a callback. I'm sorry about this. So either like the objects, it's like the objects that we are basically parsing from the JSON, or an error message saying that something happened, right? And then there's also going to be an error event in case an error happens, and then we will do the same. There's going to be a callback, but in this case from the request, not from the res. And finally, we're going to be ending the request, and then that's it with the fetch method. Again, this is just to basically get HTTP requests. We're going to get a JSON, and then we're going to return it as objects that it's going to be useful for the coding later on. Now we create a server, HTTP that creates server. We have these request and response streams, and then we go to the first one. So as soon as the client basically tries to get to the localhost 3000 through a get method, we're gonna have this one. So the team options, as I said before, these team options will give us all the teams from the Premier League. In this case, this PL represents the league, and this basically is telling us, oh, I want teams from this competition, from the Premier League. But we can actually change it later on if we want. But in this case, since I already told you that I'm basing on the Premier League, then that'll be fine. But there are a lot of leagues and competitions available on here with a free tier. Okay. Then basically, as I said before, we're passing these team options into the JSON where we're gonna receive important data. So we're gonna get an error message maybe, or a data. So if it happens that it occurs an error, right, trying to fetch this JSON with this callback right here, if it returns an error, or basically the data teams, so we try to retrieve the data, the teams, right? But in case something happened, we don't have any teams on this data, then we're gonna say error loading teams. And the rest right here is gonna be basically the status code is gonna be 500, and then we're gonna be passing a plain text on here, just basically saying that there was an error loading teams. And then we're gonna build an HTML. So probably I made a mistake, or I didn't want it to complicate myself trying to do an HTML and then having to read files, because I was a little bit confused about it, I'm gonna be honest, and I found this to be the most useful. Probably it's gonna be, as I said before, it's a little bit messy, but I managed to basically do everything. And then we're gonna have this HTML. So we're gonna be saving it in an HTML. We're gonna be passing later on to the as a response to the stream response. So there's nothing fancy on here. This is the header, this is the title, and on here, since we're receiving data and we're receiving teams, for each team, right? For each team, we're gonna have an option value. This option value basically let us, through the select method, will let the user, or the client in this case, basically fill up a form, select some team. So we will gonna basically fill it up the options, right? Gonna fill it up all the options. Like for example, if Liverpool comes in, then basically there's going to be an option to select. After basically this is filled up, so we're gonna be taking the team ID. This ID will be useful later on when we do the news API. I'm sorry, not the news API. When we get the matches, and this is going to be the team name. This is the only thing that it's going to be show to the client, the team name, as an option. And then we're going to be also using HTML. We're going to be adding a submit button. So basically the user actually fills up the form and then sends it back to the server. And then we have the rest, the right head, to show that basically it was successful. And then we're going to be writing the response back to the client. So the client will get basically the form to fill it up at this point. And once the client fills up the form, which remember, the form, so the method is going to be post, and then the action will be the result. So basically we're going to be getting all the information on the header, right? It's not going to be implicitly on the URL. And then this action is basically, once the user selects the click button, it will take me to this results URL. Once we are here, right? Once the request method is equal to post and the request URL is equal to results, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a body that is going to be empty. And then we're going to have a data event to retrieve all the data, that in this case is going to be this one that we pass again as a header and not in the URL. So we're going to have a data event where basically everything that we are getting from this event is going to be saved on the body. And then request that on. This is a little bit big. It's a little bit complex. So we're going to be having an end event. Well, we will be having what? We'll be having a team. And the query string that parse body basically will let us do this, like break down the headers into two separate fields where we have team ID and team and name row. And then we're going to be splitting this into basically to separate with this character right here. So we're going to be declaring Premier League on here. And then here is something that basically when I was trying to find the news, I found it difficult, so I have to strip the FC, because I don't know why, but the API returns FC for every club, even though not every club is named basically FC. Like for example, Manchester City FC. It's not the actual name, so I had to strip it, except for Southampton, that this is actually the real name for Southampton. So when looking for information, when looking for news, it's very useful to have it as is. So we get actual information from the club. And then basically, if the team name is not Southampton, we just basically declare it right here as Southampton. And this is just going to be printed on the server once we run the code. So it's going to be the Premier League team and the team name row. That's just to make a distinction between the different names. For example, Premier League team will not have an FC, while the team name row will have an FC. That's it. Now we are calling the next to schedule matches. So again, I use the match options. I'm passing the fetch.json. I'm doing exactly the same thing I did before, but in this case to get the matches rather than to get the teams. Then I basically declare upcoming matches to just get the first two matches, the two next matches that the given team will have. And then we have this URL. And with this URL, what we are doing is basically we're passing the API key. We're passing as this, as the encode URI component. Then queue in title. So basically, we're passing this Premier League team. So we're passing the name. In this case, basically, the news header that are gonna show up are the ones that basically they have the team as the header. And then the language is going to be English, and then the category is going to be sports for actual getting the like team news and not like random news that are related. Like for example, Southampton is a city in England, so it may show up like news that are happening in Southampton. But in this case, with the sports, of course, we are basically filtering all of that. This is again just to print it on the server so we know what we're doing. So news.io URL, basically it's the URL that we're using. In this case, it will just show the news IP, the team, and that's it. That's the only thing that is going to be different. And then we do an HTTP get, HTTPS that get, which we're passing these options, and then we're passing a news res, which this is going to be a stream again that will contain data from here, from this URL. And then basically we declare news data as empty string. And then we are basically having a data event to get all the information from new res. So basically every chunk, basically exactly what we did before. And then we're gonna have the end event. And then in this case, this is again for the server. So raw new data JSON. So we're going to be printing the actual JSON into the server. And then we're going to have an articles array. And and then we're going to be parsing. So JSON.parse again. This is just to get the news as as objects rather than basically as a JSON, right? So we're basically parsing the JSON and getting like meaningful information in order for me to code. So the articles is going to be nothing but parse that results. So these results is going to contain every single news header at that point that it's going to. So this will be helpful later on. And then in case of an error, there's going to be an error per parsing. And of course for this one as well. This is just for the server again, in order to tell me how many articles are actually there, how many articles were actually fetched. And then we're going to have another HTML, which is going to be, in this case, the response. So basically, we're going to again having a title, and then we're going to have next matches for a given team. And then if basically there are no upcoming matches, right? If there are no upcoming matches, if there's no length basically on this one, that means that basically there are no more games available, no upcoming matches available. So we're gonna send that. Otherwise, if we have upcoming matches, then basically we're gonna have again for each, right? For each upcoming match, we're gonna be passing a soccer match, and this soccer match will contain all the information. And again, that was possible with the JSON.parse method. And basically, we're going to be having a date, and we're going to be basically portraying each game, right? Each game. I think I'm missing something somewhere. I think I did mention that basically we're going to get 2 games, so it's fine. Alright, so we'll basically have a match date with the new date. So we're creating an instance of a date class. And this is basically the style that it's going to be written to. And here's the HTML response that it's going to be. So we're going to have soccer match.home team.name. We're going to get the name of the team that is going to be home, and then the team that is going to be away. And then it's going to be the date that they're going to be playing. Once we have this, then we're going to have basically the latest news from the second API from the news team, which basically, again, if the articles on here, basically there are no articles, then that means that we weren't able to find news for that team. So we will just like give the message no news available. Otherwise, if there are, then basically we're going to slice the articles. So in this case, we're just going to portray 5 articles from the team, and that for each team we're going to be basically selecting a URL. So that's another point. So even though there's like a URL portray as the news, and actually there's, as I said before, there's a URL with the title. If you click it, it's not going to take you anywhere. And I think I didn't have to do anything about it, just like show up the most recent news as basically a header. That's what I did. I didn't do, as I said before, like the logic of clicking the URL and then that will take you to the actual page. Then basically after everything is done, you will have a 200 response saying that basically it was successful. And in case of an error, there is going to be an error event saying that basically there's an error fetching the news. And then we will have our known 404 status code in the case something happened, or maybe the user enter a URL that is not valid. Then basically there's going to be a not found response back to the client. And finally, we will be listening to port 3000. So in this case, right, we're going to run this code. We're going to run it. We're going to go here. So I was running this, but let's see if it works. So you see, I have all these teams right here. All these available teams that I got it from the football API. So for example, let's choose Leicester City. It's going to submit the form. The user submits the form, and then he gets the results. So I know I said that there may be two matches for 2 months. Like I'm going to be basically showing up the next 2 matches for the team. But what happens is basically that the Premier League is about to end. So there's just one game available basically. So I kind of got lucky on this one. Otherwise, it wouldn't have shown anything for this season. So this is the only game available. Even though I said show me the next 2 games, there's only one game available, and then you can see like the news here. Maybe if you're not familiar with soccer, you may be like, probably that's not. Probably you may be like, oh, this may be random news, but in this case, all of these, if you're familiar with soccer, it will be like really clear that these are actually news from like a soccer news. So let's say for another team, for example, Barmont, and then it's going to take these, and then we have only 2 news, and we will go back to this server, to the terminal on here, and then you can see, like, for example, it's going to return like all the JSON. There's going to be how many articles were fetched, then we'll have here, so don't worry about that. And so, for example, the team Leicester City, you can see that I stripped the FC, right? This is just to show you. And then we'll have the URL. In this case, this is going to be the URL. This is going to be the URL, which, as you can see, Leicester City is basically put here, and then we have the code. And then there's going to be the raw JSON data here. So we'll have all these JSON files. And then basically for Bournemouth, it's going to be the same thing. And then the articles fetch were 2 in this case. So that's why they were shown 2. And I didn't use any cache because I feel like it's not useful, since basically there are news that are going to be basically constant, and we want the most recent ones. So basically, what would we catch, like the news or like the teams? At least that's what I thought. And how did I make sure that the code is actually synchronous? Pretty much because it has to basically make a call to the API football, and then once it gets a team, that's when this URL is fired. So this cannot be fired unless basically there was already some information, or there was we already got a team from the API football. And I think that'll be all for the project. I think it took me a little bit too much. Thank you, and that's it.